we've been following closely since yesterday. A gunman opening fire in the lobby of a Midtown office building, and authorities say that person had a history of mental illness.
On July 28, 2025, at 11:47 a.m., office workers at 345 Park Avenue were checking emails, pouring coffee, and planning their afternoon. By 11:52 a.m., 4 of them would be dead, dozens would be hiding for their lives, and Midtown Manhattan would be sealed off like a war zone. What happened in those 5 minutes would become one of the darkest days New York had seen in decades. The day it began, July 28, 2025. The summer air was heavy in Midtown Manhattan that Monday morning. July 28th felt like any other workday in New York City. Hot, crowded, loud, and moving at full speed. Inside 345 Park Avenue, hundreds of people were already deep into their routines. Meetings were running, emails were flying, and security guards stood quietly at their posts. Nothing about that morning suggested that history was about to change. But at around 11:45 a.m., a man named Shane Devin Tamura walked toward the building. He didn't run. He didn't hide his face. He didn't look nervous. He looked like every other person walking into a Manhattan office tower. A man with a bag, dressed in dark clothes, blending perfectly into the flow of people. That bag, however, was not carrying lunch or paperwork. Inside was a semi-automatic rifle and ammunition. Within minutes of entering the building, the first gunshots rang out. At first, some people thought it was construction or a loud crash. Midtown is full of noise, but when the sound repeated, sharp, fast, and violent, people knew something was wrong. Panic exploded through the lobby. People screamed, ran, dropped their phones, and shoved past one another to escape. By 11:52 a.m., the building had turned into a trap. Doors were locked, stairwells were packed, elevators were frozen, and somewhere inside, a gunman was moving. Inside the chaos. When the shooting began, no one knew where to go. Some employees ran into hallways only to turn back when they heard more gunfire.
Manhattan. A mass shooting which turned this street into an attempted life-saving theatre. One victim receiving CPR on the pavement. Distressed tourists and office workers look on.
Others dove into offices and slammed doors shut. People hid under desks, inside storage rooms, and behind filing cabinets. Some were on video calls when the shots started. Others were eating lunch. Ordinary moments were shattered by terror. One of the most haunting parts of this tragedy came from what people were doing on their phones. Text messages started flying. Families wrote, "Are you okay?" Coworkers warned, "Stay where you are." Some people typed messages that sounded like goodbyes. Some called 911 in whispers, afraid to make noise. Others recorded videos in case they didn't make it out alive. Security cameras later showed people crawling on the floor, pulling others into rooms and blocking doors with furniture. Every sound felt like the shooter was coming closer. Even the air conditioners humming felt too loud. People were trapped in silence, waiting to hear footsteps. Or worse. Outside the building, police sirens began to scream through Midtown. Streets were locked down, helicopters hovered above. The city was already watching, but inside, no one knew if help would arrive in time. The officer who stood his ground. Among the people inside 345 Park Avenue that day was an off-duty NYPD officer who had taken a private security job in the building. When the shooting started, he had the same choice everyone else had: hide or run. But he chose something different. He ran toward the gunfire. Police later confirmed that he confronted the shooter in an attempt to stop the attack. In doing so, he was killed. His actions likely saved lives, even though it cost him his own. For many New Yorkers, his death became one of the most painful parts of the story. He wasn't just a victim. He was a protector who did exactly what he had sworn to do. As the shooting continued, people nearby heard more rounds fired. Some witnesses said they could hear yelling. Others described the sound of bullets hitting walls and glass. Every second felt endless. By the time the gunfire finally stopped, 4 people were dead, including the officer, and several others were injured. The gunman was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The terror was over, but the nightmare was just beginning. The man behind the gun. When police identified the shooter as Shane Devin Tamura, they immediately began pulling together his digital and travel history. What emerged was not a random visitor to New York, but a man who had deliberately traveled across multiple states to reach Midtown Manhattan. Investigators confirmed that he had driven for days before arriving in the city, bringing with him a rifle, ammunition, and body armor. This was not a crime of impulse. It was a crime of intention. Friends and acquaintances later told reporters that Tamura had struggled with mental health issues for years. Some described him as withdrawn. Others said he talked about feeling wronged by systems bigger than himself. But the most chilling discovery was the handwritten note found near his body. In it, Tamura mentioned professional football, brain injuries, and what investigators believed were references to CTE, a degenerative brain condition linked to repeated head trauma. The note didn't offer a clear motive, but it suggested that he believed he had been harmed by forces he could no longer fight. That detail added a disturbing layer to the case. It meant the shooter may not have been acting purely out of anger, but out of a twisted sense of being ignored, damaged, and invisible. Still, law enforcement made one thing clear: no mental struggle justifies what he did. The victims left behind. As investigators worked through the evidence, families were being notified. 4 people had been killed, including the NYPD officer who ran toward danger. News outlets began releasing names, and suddenly the story wasn't about a shooter anymore. It was about mothers, fathers, co-workers, and loved ones who would never come home. Co-workers described victims as kind, hardworking, and ordinary people who simply went to work that morning. That's what made the tragedy so devastating. These weren't people in dangerous situations. They were in an office building on a Monday afternoon. Vigils appeared almost immediately outside, 345 Park Avenue. Flowers, handwritten notes, and candles filled the sidewalk. Strangers hugged. Some people cried. Others just stood in silence, staring at the building that had turned into a grave. New York had seen violence before, but this one hit differently. It happened in a place meant to feel safe. How security failed. One of the biggest questions that followed the shooting was simple but terrifying. How did he get inside? 345 Park Avenue was supposed to be secure, yet Tamura was able to enter carrying a rifle and body armor. In the months that followed, lawsuits were filed by victims' families, including the widow of one man who was killed. These lawsuits accused the building's management of failing to take reasonable security measures, such as proper screening or better trained guards. The case triggered a broader conversation across New York. How safe are private office buildings? How much responsibility do property owners have to protect the people inside? Could better security have saved lives that day? No one could bring the victims back, but the legal battles ensured the tragedy wouldn't be forgotten. A city that didn't forget. In the weeks after the shooting, New York changed in subtle ways. Some office buildings increased security. Some companies allowed more remote work. People looked twice at strangers in lobbies. Loud noises made people jump. The emotional impact was just as powerful. Survivors struggled with anxiety, nightmares, and guilt. Many asked themselves why they lived while others didn't. Therapists, counselors, and support groups were flooded with people trying to make sense of something that made no sense. The shooting became more than a crime. It became a memory burned into the city. Why this story still matters. The 2025 Midtown Manhattan shooting was not just about one man with a gun. It was about vulnerability in modern life. It showed how quickly normal can become chaos and how fragile safety really is. It also showed courage, from the officer who ran toward danger, to the co-workers who pulled each other into hiding, to the strangers who comforted each other afterward. In the face of horror, humanity still appeared. And that is why this story must be told. If this story affected you, share it. If you believe these victims deserve to be remembered, support this channel by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Your engagement helps real stories reach real people. And in our next documentary, we will uncover another shocking New York case, the torture and killing of Sam Nordquist, a crime so brutal it stunned even seasoned investigators.